The Panama Canal, a monument to vision, sacrifice, and the price of progress. A world divided by oceans, united by sweat and steel. A single ribbon of water linking two oceans, built by shoveling through hell itself. How the Panama Canal nearly broke the modern world. The Panama Canal demanded the labor of 75,000 human beings, the sacrifice of entire crews to the silent and invisible killers, and the defeat of a mountain determined to bury everyone who challenged it. Before the tunnel was finally finished, 27,000 men were dead, and the world's greatest engineering powers teetered on the edge of disaster. Their dream was simple: to carve a shortcut between two great oceans and redraw the world's trade routes. But in Panama, simplicity met the jungle, and lost. Fresh from the triumph at Suez, Ferdinand de Lesseps and his backers arrived, with sea-level ambitions and steam shovels. The maps were already drawn, and the contracts were signed. The camps started to sprang up along the Isthmus. Then, the ground itself turned hostile, and the rain came hard and constant. The mud swallowed the machines. Suddenly the Chagres River rose, undoing the months of work overnight, and the Culebra, the mountain that eats men with every cut. Another landslide came through, but the worst waited in the air. In the heat of the tents, the fevers spiked. The yellow jack malaria ripped through crews and clerks alike. The doctors were fighting the mystery they could not see. All theories blamed the bad air and the swamp mists, anything but the tiny wings that stitched dusk to dawn. Mosquitoes were everywhere, unnoticed, unstoppable. And the graveyards kept spiking at the edge of camp, and the crosses outpaced progress. Payrolls were running extremely thin. The equipment were getting rusted where they were stalled. In Paris, optimism curdled into scandal as the costs soared high and the confidence collapsed. By the time the French effort faltered, the jungle had reclaimed the cuts, and the Isthmus had collected its price. What remained was just the wreckage, steel half buried in clay, and a question no engineer had yet answered. How do you tame a land that kills the men who touch it? And then there was the land itself, the Culebra Cut, a mountain of clay and rock. It collapsed again and again, swallowing the machines, swallowing the workers in silent motion, and in addition swallowing the months of progress. By 1889, the French effort was bankrupt. The jungles were overgrown with rusting equipment, and the death toll were rising. The canal became the world's greatest unfinished scar. Finally, in 1904, the United States took over. They inherited a graveyard of French dreams. The rails were choked by vines and the boilers sinking in the mud. The ambitions of the workers oxidized to a reddish hush, and the new assault began not with fanfare but with the sweat. The workers, mostly from the Caribbean, filed into the heat 10 hours a day. They were swinging shovels that were blistering the palms and setting dynamite that rattled ribs. They struck at rock which seemed to heal itself. By nightfall, each landslide rewrote the day's work like a stubborn line of history refusing to be edited, and the scale became the language. Over 200 million cubic meters of earth, enough to fill 80 Great Pyramids of Giza, had to be persuaded to move. Steam shovels larger than the size of locomotives bit into the Culebra Cut steel jaws, chewing a mountain that would not go quietly. Behind them, trains snaked in ceaseless procession, hauling away an endless stream of spoil, iron wheels ticking like a heartbeat you could measure in tonnage. Here, progress wasn't a march, it was a siege. Day after day, the Isthmus answered back with mud, with heat, with the grinding patience of stone. And yet the line kept inching forward, cut by cut, blast by blast, as if human will could redraw the shape of a continent. But their deadliest enemy was still invisible. It was not the rock or the mud. It was a mosquito. The yellow fever and malaria scythed through the camps, beds in the hospital were stacked, and the long hallways lined with coffins after coffins. Crews were dissolved in a week. The project was leaning toward the same abyss that swallowed the French, and then a different kind of army arrived. William Gorgas, armed with Walter Reed's proof from Cuba, the yellow fever rode in the bite of Aedes aegypti. So, if the vector dies, the fever dies, and the canal zone became a laboratory of survival. Teams were fanned out with ledgers and the ladders, the windows were getting screened, and the homes were sealed and fumigated room by room. Barrels were covered and the cisterns oiled, puddles were completely drained, ditches were cut to pull the wetlands dry and torching the breeding grounds, and then the mosquito death rates plummeted. For the first time, in months, workers could survive the wet season. The weekly inspections marked every house clean to be cleaned. Even the graveyards were drained. It felt like war because it was, against the water that didn't move and the air that did. Finally, the death curve started to bend. Yellow fever finally started to vanish from the canal zone within 2 years. Malaria, once ripping through thousands, fell and kept falling. The hospital wards finally emptied. The pay lines grew longer than the funeral processions, and with the fever broken, iron and sweat could finally contend with stone. With disease finally contained, the shovels turned to precision. Now, the Americans faced the canal's greatest gamble, the Gatun locks. Monsters of concrete and steel, each one longer than a football field, creating a moving staircase built to lift the ocean. Once finished, each chamber would raise giant ships 85 feet above the sea, then set them down, smooth as a hand on the far side. They chose height over depth. A massive dam at Gatun would tame the wild Chagres River, spreading it out into a giant lake, and these locks would become the hinges between two worlds. The workers carved the foundations straight into bedrock, mixing aggregate, sand and cement together. The high cableways swung buckets like pendulums, pouring the mix in heavy layers that locked together like teeth. Inside the walls, a hidden anatomy took shape. They made the water tunnels big enough to drive a truck through. The valves and pipes braided together into a massive gravity engine. There were no pumps, just water, weight, and perfect timing. The lock gates rose like iron cliffs, hollow, riveted, and buoyant, and were able to swing on their heels with the push of small electric motors attached to the sides. Each gate sealed to its twin with a tight V-shaped kiss, a perfect fit that held back an inland sea. To back up the safety chains and emergency dams, the fender stood by, because one single mistake here could destroy a continent's shortcut. And on the walls, the electric locomotives, the mules, gripped the rails, guiding the hulls with inch-perfect pull so the steel wouldn't scrape stone. Over at the control house, a miniature display board glowed, and a single lever choreographed hundreds of tons of pressure, valves yawning, tunnels rushing in circular motion, while the chamber rising in minutes as water swirled and foamed like it was breathing. Finally, it was tested first with the dry runs and then wet runs. Sandbags were used instead of ships. Then, the real hulls made history. The concrete did not flex, the gates did not flinch. And one morning a freighter climbed 3 steps into the sky and finally crossed a man-made lake and descended 3 steps more. It was a clear proof that iron and human could teach the sea to kneel and rise on command. In 1914, after a decade of struggle, the first ship sailed through the Panama Canal, but progress demanded a terrible price. Over 27,000 lives lost between the French and American efforts, but the impact was seismic. World trade routes rewrote themselves overnight. The canal cut 13,000 kilometers off the journey, the fleets that once circled South America. Before the Panama Canal opened in 1914, any ship traveling from the New York to San Francisco, this treacherous trip was about 35 days. A journey that once took over a month was slashed down to 14 days total. And from that first transit decades ago to the massive steel ships of today, the staircase of oceans keeps lifting and lowering and quietly reshaping the map with every passage. From jungle cut to the global artery, today the canal stands, a monument of quiet power, stitched into the spine of two oceans. The world learned the new distances and old ambitions find shorter roads, and at the canal with every lift and lowering humanity rehearses the art of remaking the possible. From the graves of 27,000 dreamers to the triumph of 75,000 workers, the Panama Canal is a living lesson in the costs of ambition. So what other buried blueprints and untold stories of human ingenuity are waiting to be uncovered? To see how the world's deepest tunnels and tallest dams and the sleek engineering marvels were truly built, subscribe to Wonders Are Decoded and join the journey. Drop your thoughts below. Was the Panama Canal worth the price? What wonder should we decode next?